Hello and welcome grade 11th. In our today's session, we will be looking at a short story titled Gemini. On this short story, we will be looking at the following points. Number 1, summary. 2, we'll be looking at the suitability of the title for the story. 3, we'll be looking at the themes of the story. 4, setting of the story. We'll also be looking at the plot and the characters. So, the characters of the story and the characterization. On our summary for the story is about Siva, who is the main character of the story. Siva works as a waiter at the Constellation Hotel, and his son, Krishna, who is a standard 6 learner at Alpha Primary School. Siva feels that he is not living the life he was destined to live. He hopes that his son will be ambitious and achieve more in his life to mend the gap that he has in his life. He hopes that his son will be able to achieve better things that he could when he was young. However, it appears that Krishna's life is predestined to follow on his father's footsteps, as his academic performance is similar to that of his father during his schooling years. On the story, it appears that Siva once failed standard 6, and his son Krishna has also failed standard 6. Now moving on to the title of the story, we'll be looking at whether the title Gemini is suitable for the story or not. Gemini is a zodiac sign symbolized by twins. Therefore, the title Gemini serves as a metaphor for the lives of the father and son. This title serves an example of how the father and son persuaded similar twin-like parts. So we can say the title is suitable for the story because Siva and his son had went through similar path with their academic performances. Now moving on to the next one, which is the themes of the story. The story has many themes, and the first theme is fate, or we can say destiny. Excuse me, let me just erase here so that I can have more space to write. The theme of the story, fate or destiny. In this short story, the father was optimistic that his son would be successful and live a better life. However, as fate would have it, at the end of the story, the son, like his father, failed his studies and ruined the chances of him ever becoming more successful. So Siva and his son were both destined to fail. Remember that Gemini symbolizes a pair of twins, and Siva and his son has had similar paths where they both failed standard 6. And another theme for the story is love. The strong bond of love between father and son is reflected throughout the story. The father plays both the maternal and paternal role to his son because he has since lost his wife. Even when he discovered that his son had failed standard 6, he continued to be affectionate and touched him. Another theme for the story is fear. Krishna decides to give Mrs. Rudy his report card to give to his father instead of him giving it to his father. So we can say Siva was afraid to give his father his report on his own because he feared to see the disappointment on his father's face and to also see the reaction when he gives his report card to his father. He feared what his father's reaction would be towards his report card. Siva also fears the worst when he learns that his house was on fire. He is convinced that his son has died in the fire until Mrs. Rudy rescues him from his imagination. Another theme for the story is letting go. After Siva failed his standard 6 exams, his teachers abandoned him. And that was something that stayed with Siva. He had struggled to let go of the past. He struggled to let go of the fact that he had failed his standard 6 exams and that his teachers, instead of helping him, they abandoned him. The fact that Siva has retained his standard 6 examination report, among other significant documents, serves as a metaphor for this idea. Siva is unable to let go of the past despite the passing of time. And moving on to another theme of the story is disobedience, or we can say rebellion. The fact that Siva did not listen to his teachers resulted in him being a failure. Siva spent most of his time in cafes and cinemas, smoking in corners and rooming with gang instead of focusing on his schoolwork. And that resulted in him failing his examinations and his teachers abandoning him. Siva's teachers abandoned him because of his rebelliousness. He was very disobedient. He was not focused on his schoolwork. Instead, he spent most of his time doing negative things instead of focusing on his schoolwork, of which resulted him in being a failure in his life. And we'll be moving on to the next point. Our next point will be the setting of the story. The story is set during apartheid. in Soweto. The story takes place in the 1970s or 1980s, during the height of apartheid repression. Other settings of the story are at the park station in the morning, at the hotel, at Siva's house, in the streets, and the bedroom, and mostly the setting of the story takes place in the evening. We'll be moving on to our next point, which is the plot of the story. Just give me a little bit of time to erase here so that I can write about the plot of the story. We're done. The plot of the story. 1. The exposition. The exposition is an introduction that provides details of characters and the settings of the story. And in this story, the narrator introduces Siva as the main character who works at the Constellation Hotel. He believes that he was born to achieve greater things in life, but fate proves him otherwise, as he ends up being just a waiter. Krishna's son is likely to live the life of his father if he continues to take his studies for granted. The story is mostly taking place at Siva's house in the mornings and evenings. Another one is the rising action. The rising action is part of the story that develops the problem or conflict. The rising action on this story starts when Siva struggles to like his job and he regrets for not working hard towards his academic performances. He is now getting limited opportunities due to his limited education, but finds solace in his son as the only hope to mend the tear in his heart by achieving more in life. And we'll be moving on to the climax of the story. Siva discovers that his house was on fire, and all he can think of is the life of his only hope, his son Krishna. Siva's internal conflicts are shown when he still struggles to accept his living conditions, playing both maternal and paternal role to his son after losing his wife, and now the burning of his house. Mrs. Rudy hands over Krishna's report card to Siva, and he starts to tremble before he opens Krishna's report as he foreshadows the outcomes. The climax here starts when Krishna found out that he had failed standard 6, and instead he burns his father's house. When Siva finds out that his house is burning, he was very shattered because he had thought that his only hope to a better life, his son Krishna, had died in the fire. But when Mrs. Rudy hands over Krishna's report card, Siva met his worst nightmare when he discovered that his son had failed standard 6, just like he failed during his school years. And we'll be moving on to the falling action of the story. Falling action. Mrs. Rudy alerts Siva that only few items burned from his house and his son is unharmed. When Siva reads Krishna's report card, he only noticed that he has failed his studies, and that when he realized that his son can never be able to have a chance at a better life because he has followed in his footsteps of failing his examinations. And we'll be moving on to the resolution. The resolution is the conclusion to the story that reveals the solution. Here we'll be looking at how the conflict between Siva and his son is going to be resolved. Siva discovered that his son did not only take his psychic but everything about him, including the fact that he also failed standard 6 with almost similar comments from their teachers. However, Siva could only express love, care and support to his son Krishna. Siva realized that even if his son has failed his standard 6, he still has to love him. He is his father, and he shows love, affection towards his son, even though he had high hopes of him and Krishna could not reach those hopes. Now we'll be moving on to the characters. The characters of the story. In this story, we have 4 characters. The first character, of which is the protagonist, is Siva. Siva is a very gullible man. This is shown in his early stages when he was still young, as he enjoyed hanging out with the gang, dropping out of school after failing standard 6 twice, wasting time on cigarettes, going to cafes and cinemas. These are examples of someone who is not well grounded and focused. Siva is full of regrets, especially when he thinks about how his life would have turned out if he had listened to his teachers. He loves his son unconditionally. He thinks of his son in a loving way, and that shows that he loves him unconditionally, even though his son did not fulfill his hopes. And our second character is Krishna. Krishna is a flat character. He is a son to Siva and narrated to be more like his father, both physically and intellectually. Krishna is a very rebellious boy who tried to set his home on fire because he failed his standard 6, of which is a similar characteristic to his father, where Siva failed standard 6 twice and he wasted his time on cigarettes and being with the gang instead of focusing on his schoolwork. Our third character is Mrs. Rudy. Mrs. Rudy is a neighbor to Siva and also Siva's teacher. Mrs. Rudy cared for Siva's son and she was a very good woman. Our fourth character is Siva's wife, of which is Krishna's mom. Krishna's mom, not much is said about her, but we know that she had passed away. And in Siva's explanation of her, it seems she was a very stubborn person and she was extremely religious. And that will be all for our session today. Thank you.